Back in January, I picked up this absolutely beat old 1988 Honda CR500 two-stroke while I was down in Arizona visiting my family for Christmas. I found this bike on Facebook Marketplace and my dad snagged it for me, and I brought it home to Montana to begin the long journey of bringing this dirt bike back to life. I tore it all the way down to the frame and then tore the engine completely apart to find a lot of problems, as can be expected with a 37-year-old engine. The oil drain bolt lost mostly coolant, revealing a failing water pump. The inner clutch cover was destroyed. The cases and cylinder had been gouged with a screwdriver, and its age was apparent. I fully disassembled the cases, cylinder, and transmission, which went to Millennium Technologies along with the crankshaft. Millennium repaired and vapor blasted the case halves, repaired and re-sleeved the cylinder, rebuilt and balanced the crankshaft with an all-new connecting rod from Pro X, and micro-polished the transmission and shift assembly. While I awaited those parts to return from Millennium, I did lots of planning and parts sourcing, preparing to build the ultimate CR500 engine, leaving no stone left unturned, both from a cosmetic and a functional perspective. One quick reminder that one of you will win this CR500 in November, and you can enter over on my website by grabbing some merch or direct entries. Let's build a big bore two-stroke engine.
Just drop the gasket straight into the crank. How not to slice a gasket. Not to worry. We'll get it out of there.
Now time for installation of the shift shaft. Luckily, I realized a few weeks prior that the original shift shaft was bent. I sourced a used one on eBay, which supposedly matched the part number but had one small difference. There was no taper in the middle of the shaft, which I don't see causing any problems based on the case design, and is probably a little stronger. The OEM basket wasn't terrible but did have some notching, and for the caliber I'm aiming for on this build, filing the basket wasn't a good enough solution. I sourced a new basket from Pro X, which is a high-quality, hard anodized basket, coated to reduce friction and have very high resistance to notching or wear. The gear needed to be pressed out of the OEM basket, which is a bit of a process and requires some precision and care. First, the rivets need to be ground off to remove the plate and kickstart gear. I use an angle grinder for this, they can also be drilled out, and I am careful to remove as little material from the plate as possible as it will be reused. After some time, the rivets looked like this and the plate could be removed. I carefully and evenly popped it off with a screwdriver, and then the clutch rubbers and kickstart gear could be removed. This left the inner gear to be pressed out of the basket. I set this up with my shop press using a socket, and it pressed out relatively easily. Now, pressing the gear back into the new basket is where attention to detail is necessary. It is very important that this gear is pressed in straight and doesn't allow the basket to flex when doing so. I initially began pressing the gear with the basket supported on the fingers, and quickly decided that was a bad idea and the basket must be supported from the middle. I taped this collar from my Motion Pro steering bearing tool into the center to ensure it was located and supported properly and wouldn't slip. My Tusk crank puller created the last bit of required spacing, and this basket was fully supported from the center for the gear to be pressed back in. I oiled the gear and basket, supported the gear with a driver from my Tusk bearing driver kit, and carefully pressed it fully into the clutch basket. Mission success. The basket comes with new clutch rubbers, so I installed those, followed by the kicker gear, and then added red stuck nuts thread locker to the new bolts as I'd like them not to come out, and I reinstalled the plate. I smoothed out any grinding imperfections with prime wheels so there was no metal fragments or sharp edges, and reinstalled it upside down. I installed the new bolts, torqued them to spec, and then peened the edges inside the basket. This basket was now ready to install. With the basket installed, along came the inner hub as well, and I installed and torqued the clutch nut to spec, which is only 47 foot-pounds for this bike. Much lower than most, which surprised me for a 500. Now, I forgot about one item that needs replacing. I thought maybe I could fix it, but this clutch lifter that sits inside the pressure plate has the ball sort of welded into itself after all those years of abuse. This CR500 uses a rod ball lifter design. I did source a new rod and ball, but need a new lifter too. I ordered one on eBay, but while I awaited its arrival to finish clutch installation, I could still get the entire top end installed. While Millennium repaired and re-sleeved this cylinder, Charles over at MxRevival vapor blasted it to perfection for me. If you've not seen Charles's videos, he is linked on screen and down below. He does incredible bike builds and giveaways of his own, and I am always stoked to have the opportunity to work with him. I installed these 7 cylinder studs using the double nut method. Someone previously pointed out in an older build that there is indeed a tool for this, but honestly I've had solid luck with the double nut method. I will say I am very grateful to Millennium for getting the old studs out, as they were seized in there big time. I have a brand new piston from Pro X that Millennium already fit to the cylinder, but I did go ahead and measure ring end gap, which was in spec. I prepared the piston with the left piston circlip and rings, and then installed a new OEM base gasket. Now Millennium repaired those gouges in the cases and cylinder, so I wasn't sure if this impacted their height and would alter my squish, which is the piston to cylinder head clearance at top dead center. I installed the piston and final circlip, followed by the cylinder, and bolted it down using new nuts from the Bolt engine hardware kit. Now to measure squish, I added a piece of solder inside the cylinder on top of the piston, as it is soft enough that it will compress with the head installed if it's too tight, which I can then measure its thickness to determine the squish. I ended up asking Luke over at Fathead Racing, and he said to aim for right around 2 millimeters. I laid the solder into the cylinder and taped it in place so it could not slip, as I wanted to take the measurement at the left and rightmost sides of the cylinder. Too tight of a squish can allow the piston to actually hit the cylinder head at very high RPMs, as the rod is essentially stretching when it moves that fast. I did not feel resistance when cycling the engine and was concerned that my squish was going to be too large, but upon inspection of the solder, I saw the left and right edges had been flattened ever so slightly. Very difficult to see on camera, as we were talking a 1/4 millimeter here, but measurement with the calipers showed 2.12 millimeters. The squish is in spec, and we are all set to properly install the cylinder head. Now this Fathead Racing cylinder head is not only stunning, but includes a decompression lever and features swappable domes for altered compression ratios and improves cooling over stock. These heads are made in the USA, and Luke and I have worked together on many builds over the years. You can save 5% on Fatheads with the code KP. Now Luke did specifically request some smooth jazz for the installation, so let's keep this engine build going with that vibe. With the engine looking stellar and so close to completion at this point, I was waiting on just a couple final parts to arrive, which you will see shortly. In the meantime, I debated long and hard whether to buff the machining marks out of these clutch and ignition covers by 2 strokes only. I actually really like the machining marks on that new inner clutch cover, which is a billet replacement for the damaged OEM one, but for these outer covers, I decided they would look a little cleaner without the machining marks. So I spent some time with prime wheels until I achieved my desired look. Note, the water pump housing is also by 2 strokes only, and they even offer billet case halves for these CR500s. Since my cases were salvageable, I wanted to reuse them as they are the heart of the bike, but if yours are gone beyond repair, the fact that there is a billet option for cases for an 88 CR500 in the year 2025 is pretty epic. The fit of each of these components was perfect. Finally, a couple days later, my last engine components arrived, and this engine could be finished. This included a few pieces of hardware that had just been freshly zinc plated by Nick at Nick's Vapor Honing Services. He has the rest of my hardware, which will be finished soon, but I asked if he could sneak in these 3 pieces as they were all that were left to finish the engine. Nick, being absolutely awesome, knocked them out that night and shipped them the next day. And after many months of planning a color scheme, sourcing hard-to-find parts, and paying great attention to detail as I reassembled this beast piece by piece, there is now a monster CR500 2-stroke engine sitting on my workbench.
It's actually finished. There is a completely rebuilt 1988 Honda CR500 2-stroke engine sitting next to me. And yes, it took a while. This is the oldest engine I've ever built. Sourcing some of the hard-to-find parts was not easy, but got it done. Went with a pretty nice, clean, and simple look along with that gold fathead. As you guys suggested, like I said, I am listening to your feedback for the color scheme of this build that you guys have been leaving in the comments, and I think with the rest of the color scheme for the bike, this is going to look absolutely incredible. So I know it's only an engine, but for where this bike started, this is an incredible milestone, and really, things are coming together nicely. There are only a few major tasks left on the list, and I'm plucking away at them one by one. If you are enjoying these videos and are excited to see the build progress continue, the best ways you can support me are get entered to win this bike. Yes, one of you will win it when it's finished. You can go over to my website and get some merchandise or some direct entries, and it will get you entered to win this 500 when it's done. You can also use my Rocky Mountain ATV MC link down below where I earn a commission on your purchases at no additional cost to you. So that's a great way to support me in the channel, and that is where I buy the vast majority of my parts, tools, and gear. There will also be a link down below to a page on my website where I list all of the parts and tools used to build this engine. One more huge thank you to the amazing people and companies that make builds like this possible. I absolutely could not build an engine of this caliber and beauty without some incredible support. Also, if you want to see more, please click subscribe. We're almost to 200,000, and I will see you guys soon with episode 9.